Ruth sat quietly in the dim light of the small living room, the faint hum of the television filling the silence like a distant whisper. Outside, late afternoon sunlight filtered weakly through the half-closed curtains, casting long shadows that stretched across the worn carpet. Her hands rested gently on her lap, the skin thin and fragile, veins raised like little rivers under the surface. She blinked slowly, trying to focus on the flickering images on the screen. The faces, the voices, they all seemed to float past her like a hazy memory she couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes, she felt like she was standing outside herself, watching from afar but unable to speak or act. The fog in her mind thickened most days now, stealing pieces of who she used to be. "Mom?" The voice was soft but steady, breaking through the quiet. Ruth turned her head toward the doorway. Marcus stood there, tall and tired-looking, his dark eyes shadowed with worry, and something she couldn't quite place. Frustration, maybe? He was her son, her pride and her burden all at once. "Yes, Marcus," she said, her voice gentle but strained. He stepped inside the room and lowered himself into the chair opposite her. "Did you take your medicine this morning?" Ruth hesitated, her brow furrowing as she tried to remember. I think so. Maybe." Marcus's sigh was heavy, his hand running through his short, tightly coiled hair. "Mom, you have to be sure. The doctor said it's important." She nodded slowly, the weariness settling deeper into her eyes. "I know. It's just hard sometimes. The days slip away." He looked away for a moment, then back again, his voice softer. "I'm worried about you. I don't want you to get lost." Ruth reached out, placing her trembling hand over his. "I'm still here, Marcus. Still me." For a moment, their eyes met, and something fragile passed between them. Hope, maybe, or a silent promise. But then the weight of everything else settled back in. From the kitchen came the sharp sound of a phone hanging up abruptly. Laura's voice echoed faintly through the thin walls, clipped and cold. "I don't see why we keep putting up with this," Laura said, her tone hard and impatient as she spoke into her phone moments earlier. "It's a mess. Marcus has a life to live. His mother's condition is holding us all back." There was a pause, then a cruel laugh. "Believe me, I'm doing what's best. For all of us." She ended the call and glanced toward the living room, a sneer twisting her lips. Ruth could feel the invisible pressure from the other side of the door, like a storm gathering just beyond reach. Ruth moved through the house carefully, each step measured and quiet. The space once filled with laughter and warmth now felt cold, as if the walls themselves had turned against her. She recalled afternoons spent cooking with Marcus when he was a boy, his laughter echoing through the rooms. Now, the memories were like shards of glass, beautiful, but sharp and painful. Laura's presence had changed everything. Her polite smiles barely hid the disdain in her eyes. She would say things with a venomous smile, disguised as concern. "Maybe if you weren't so forgetful, Marcus wouldn't have to carry this burden alone." Or, "You should be grateful Marcus supports you. Not everyone has that." Each word struck Ruth like a blow, but she forced herself to hold back tears. One evening, after a tense dinner where Laura's thinly veiled insults filled the air, Ruth found herself sitting alone on the porch steps. The sky was heavy with clouds, and a cold wind tugged at her threadbare jacket. Marcus came out, hesitation written across his face. He sat down beside her, silent for a moment. "I don't know what to do anymore," he admitted quietly. Ruth reached for his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm still your mother. I need you." He looked at her, torn between love and frustration. "I want to help you, Mom. I really do. But Laura—" Ruth's voice faltered. Marcus nodded. "I know. She's difficult." They sat in silence, the storm around them matching the turmoil inside the house. Days passed, and the rift between them only deepened. Laura's subtle cruelty became impossible to ignore. She criticized Ruth openly, knowing Marcus would side with her. "You're making things worse," she said one afternoon, her voice sharp as she folded laundry. "Marcus has to work 2 jobs because of all this." Ruth's hands clenched, the familiar ache in her chest growing. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but the illness whispered doubts into her mind. Was she really the problem? One afternoon, Ruth tried again to speak to Marcus alone. "Please listen to me. Laura is not what she seems." He shook his head, his face clouded with doubt. "Mom, it's your mind. Sometimes you say things that aren't true." Tears welled up in Ruth's eyes. "I'm telling you the truth." But the walls between them only grew higher. The first part ends here, setting the stage for the deepening conflict. Ruth's struggle with her memory and dignity, and the painful division in the family. The days blurred together, each one folding into the next like pages torn from a book no one wanted to read. Ruth's world was shrinking. The rooms that once held memories now felt like cages. Every glance from Laura was a reminder that she didn't belong here anymore. Marcus tried to keep the peace, but the strain showed in the tight line of his jaw and the way he avoided looking directly at Ruth. He spent long hours at work, came home late, and spoke less than he used to. Ruth could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he carried the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders, the one with his mother, fragile and fading, and the one with his wife, cold and unforgiving. One rainy afternoon, Ruth sat by the window, watching the droplets race down the glass. The sky was heavy and gray, mirroring the storm inside her chest. Her thoughts wandered back to better times, to her own childhood in the South, to a life that felt distant now. A sudden knock on the door startled her. She shuffled to answer, and there stood Marcus, drenched from the rain, his face pale. "Mom," he said, voice tight. "We need to talk." Inside, the air was thick with tension. Laura was nowhere to be seen. Marcus paced, running a hand through his damp hair. "I can't keep doing this." Ruth's heart trembled. "Doing what?" "Tried to keep you and Laura from tearing each other apart." She reached out, grabbing his arm gently. "Please, Marcus. I'm your mother." He looked down, ashamed. "I know. And I love you. But Laura, she's making things impossible." Ruth felt tears sting her eyes. "What does she want from you?" "Control. Power. She married me for money, for a life I built with my own hands." His words hit hard, but Ruth saw the truth in them. "Have you ever told her how you feel?" she asked softly. Marcus shook his head. "I'm scared she'll leave. And then, what happens to us?" Ruth squeezed his arm. "We'll find a way. Together." Later that night, Ruth lay awake, haunted by the day's conversation. Her mind swirled with memories and fears, the line between reality and confusion blurred. She recalled a moment from years ago, when Marcus was a boy and she promised to protect him from the harsh world outside. Now, she felt powerless to protect herself. In the quiet darkness, she whispered a prayer. For strength. For hope. The next morning, Laura stormed into the kitchen, her face twisted with anger. "Why is Marcus spending so much time with you?" she spat. "Don't you see you're driving him away?" Ruth met her gaze, steady despite the hurt. "I'm his mother. I want to help." Laura laughed coldly. "Help? You're a burden." The words cut deep, but Ruth refused to respond. She turned away, her hands trembling. Days passed, and the tension grew unbearable. Ruth's health declined. The dementia progressed, clouding her thoughts and stealing her words. Marcus was torn between duty and desperation. One evening, he found Ruth sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. "Mom?" he called softly. She blinked, focusing on him. "Marcus." I'm scared." He knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her frail shoulders. "I'm here. Always." For a brief moment, the walls crumbled, and a fragile peace settled between them. But peace was fleeting. Laura's presence loomed like a shadow, ready to strike. One afternoon, she cornered Ruth in the hallway. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "You're old, weak, and useless." Ruth's hand shook, but she lifted her chin. "I'm your husband's mother," Laura sneered. "Not for long." The cruel truth was clear. Laura wanted Ruth gone, and she knew exactly how to make it happen. The battle for Ruth's place in the family was far from over. Ruth had lived through decades of hardship, seen death and birth, carried groceries in the rain and joy in her hands. But nothing prepared her for what it meant to be erased while still alive. It started with small things. Her toothbrush disappeared from the bathroom. The recliner she liked in the living room was quietly replaced. Family photos, especially the one of her and Marcus on his graduation day, vanished from the hallway walls. Each absence was like a thread pulled from a sweater. Slow, deliberate, unspoken. She asked Marcus about the photos once. He blinked at her, confused. I didn't notice, Mom. Maybe they fell. I'll check." But he never did. And the wall stayed empty. Ruth knew better. She wasn't imagining this. She might forget where she placed her reading glasses, but she remembered love. She remembered pride and pain. Laura wanted to erase her. Not just physically, but from memory too. From history. From Marcus. And worst of all, she was winning. The dementia crept slowly but cruelly. Some mornings Ruth woke up convinced she was in her old apartment, not this cold, strange house. She'd shuffle into the hallway calling for Marcus, like he was still 10 years old, holding a scraped knee and asking for a Band-Aid. Other mornings, the past and present folded over one another like a quilt too heavy to lift. She'd pour coffee and forget whether she'd already taken her medication. Or take it twice. Sometimes she'd stare at Laura across the table and forget her name. But she never forgot the hate in her eyes. One evening, after dinner, Ruth wandered into the kitchen and found Laura whispering on the phone. "She's slipping worse every week," Laura murmured. "I think it's time to move forward." Ruth didn't move. Laura turned, startled. "How long have you been standing there?" Ruth blinked slowly. "I came for water," she said, her voice thin. Laura's face twisted. She didn't even bother pretending to be kind anymore. "Well, then drink your water. And stay out of my conversations." Ruth stood her ground. "Who are you talking to?" Laura tilted her head mockingly. "You're a doctor. You're a caseworker. Who knows?" "Hard to say. You forget things, don't you?" It was a knife cloaked in sugar. Ruth clenched the counter to keep her hands from shaking. "You want me gone?" Laura leaned in, voice low. "I've always wanted you gone." Ruth's heart pounded, but she stayed still. "I never loved your son," Laura hissed. "I just loved the life he could give me. And you're a stain on it. I don't need to hide that from you anymore." "Because Marcus? He'll believe me. Not you. Not when you forget your own name half the time." It was the first time Ruth truly feared Laura. Not because of the words, but because she knew they were laced with strategy. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a plan. Ruth tried to tell Marcus the next day. They sat in the backyard, the sun warming the small patch of grass Laura allowed her to sit on. It was quiet, peaceful, a rare calm. "Marcus," she said, choosing her words carefully, "Laura doesn't love you." He looked up from his phone, blinking. "She told me. She said it to my face." He frowned. "Mom, don't do this. She said she only married you for the money. that she's planning something, that she wants me gone. Marcus stood abruptly. Stop. I'm telling you the truth, baby. You think I don't know she's difficult? He snapped. But she's my wife. I love her. And I'm your mother, she said quietly. Do you love me too? He looked away. That silence told her everything. That night, Ruth sat on her bed for a long time, looking at the old worn Bible in her lap. The pages were bent and soft at the edges from years of reading, underlining, clinging. She prayed, but it was different now. Not words for rescue, but words for courage. She didn't have much left, but she still had herself. And she wasn't going to disappear without leaving a mark. Later that week, Laura invited someone over. A man in a blazer and polite smile. Ruth sat quietly on the sofa while they spoke in hushed tones. She has episodes, Laura said in a fake concerned voice. Wandering. Confusion. We're worried about her safety. The man nodded, scribbled notes. Do you have medical records confirming the progression? He asked. I do, Laura said quickly. I've been documenting everything. Ruth understood what was happening. Laura was laying the groundwork. For a facility. For removal. For erasure. She looked at the man and tried to speak. My name is Ruth Johnson. I live here. This is my son's home. I'm not confused. I know who I am. He smiled gently. That's good, Mrs. Johnson. But she saw it in his eyes. He didn't believe her. That night, Ruth found herself wandering the hallway again. The house was too quiet. The air too cold. She walked past Marcus and Laura's bedroom. The door was cracked. Inside, Laura laughed. Not her usual bitter sound. A younger, lighter laugh. It made Ruth pause. She peeked. Marcus was asleep. Laura was on her phone, whispering. I told you he's clueless, she giggled. A few more weeks, and she'll be out of here. Then I'll figure out the divorce. Silence. Then laughter again. I don't care. He's boring. I need someone who doesn't talk about insurance all day. Ruth stepped back. It wasn't just about her anymore. Laura was planning to leave Marcus, too. Use him. Discard him. Just like she was discarding his mother. And this time, Ruth had heard it all clearly. Ruth sat at the kitchen table the next morning, a folded piece of paper in her hand. It trembled slightly as she stared down at it. Her handwriting was shaky, but still legible. She'd written down what she heard the night before. Every word she could remember. Laura's voice still echoed in her head. I'll figure out the divorce. She had proof now. Or at least, she had the truth. The trouble was, what to do with it? She thought of Marcus. Of how he'd looked away when she'd asked, Do you love me too? There were moments when Ruth forgot names or dates or which day it was. But her heart never forgot the weight of being dismissed by your own child. And now, she knew something he didn't. Something that could break him. She had no interest in hurting him. But he needed to know who Laura really was. So she waited. She waited for the moment he would look her in the eyes again, not with pity, not with embarrassment, but like the son she remembered. The one who used to run through the front door after school yelling, Mama, I'm home! Like his voice alone could light the house. That moment never came. Instead, a week later, a brochure appeared on the dining room table. It was glossy, pastel-colored, and cheerful in a way that made Ruth's stomach turn. Sunset Hills Memory Care Facility. She flipped it open. Pictures of clean rooms. Smiling staff. A quote, Dignity in every moment. Laura appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, voice sweet and sour. I thought it might be helpful. Just in case things progress. Ruth held the brochure like it might burn her. I'm not leaving. Laura didn't smile. It's not up to you. Marcus was at work. The house felt even quieter than usual. You think I don't see what you're doing? Ruth said, her voice low. Laura stepped closer. I don't care what you see. Because every day you forget a little more. And one day, even you won't remember what you know now. Ruth stood up slowly. But today, I remember. And that's enough. Later that night, Ruth sat with her folded note again. She hadn't shown it to Marcus. Not yet. Instead, she tucked it inside her Bible, between the pages of Psalms, where the spine had started to come loose from years of thumbing. If she ever forgot, the page would still be there. And if someone else ever looked, maybe they'd finally see. The next few days passed like walking through fog. Laura had started locking the medicine cabinet. She now prepared Ruth's doses herself, handing her pills with a glass of orange juice each morning, like a warden disguising kindness as care. But Ruth didn't trust her anymore. Not with anything. And the worst part was, there were moments when she couldn't tell whether her distrust came from clarity or confusion. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she found herself holding one of Marcus's old t-shirts, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. She whispered his name. Marcus, baby, please come back to me. He wasn't gone. Not physically. But his eyes didn't recognize her struggle anymore. He saw the fog, not the fire beneath it. That Friday, a young social worker named Tanisha came by for a scheduled check-in. Marcus had arranged it after Laura suggested it would help ease the transition. Tanisha was in her early 30s, kind-eyed, sharp. She greeted Ruth with a warm smile. Mrs. Johnson, would you like to talk privately? Laura started to protest, but Tanisha cut her off gently. It's standard protocol. Just for a few minutes. Ruth followed her into the den, hands shaking. Tanisha sat down beside her. How are you feeling? Anything you want to share? Ruth stared at her for a moment, trying to decide if this was another trap. Then she reached for her Bible, flipping it open to the note she tucked inside. She handed it to Tanisha without a word. The young woman read it silently, her expression slowly hardening. Did someone really say this to you? She asked quietly. Ruth nodded. I know it's not official proof, but it's true. I remember. Tanisha folded the note gently, placing it on her lap. I believe you. Those 3 words cracked something open in Ruth's chest. Not relief. Not yet. But hope. Tanisha left with a promise to follow up. And Ruth waited. The next day, Marcus came home early. He looked tired. More tired than usual. He didn't speak to Laura when he walked in. Just went straight to the backyard. Ruth followed, standing at the doorway. Did she talk to you? He nodded. She told me what you wrote. What you heard. His voice was quiet. And do you believe me? Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know what to believe anymore. Ruth stepped closer. She's lying to you. You think I'm the one who's confused, but you're not seeing her for what she is. Marcus turned, and for the first time in weeks, looked her straight in the eyes. I'm seeing everything now. Later that night, Ruth heard yelling. Marcus and Laura. The words were muffled, but the rage was clear. You used me. I gave you everything. She's my mother. Then a crash. Then silence. Laura stormed out the next morning, a single suitcase in her hand, eyes like ice. She didn't say goodbye. Ruth stood at the window, watching as she got into her car and drove off. Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed. I told her to leave, he said. I don't care if it's temporary or not. I need time. Ruth nodded, but didn't smile. Because even now, the damage wasn't undone. She'd been heard, but only after being nearly erased. And she still wasn't sure what would happen next. The house felt different without Laura. Not just quieter, emptier. as if the walls had finally exhaled after holding their breath too long. Marcus spent the first few days in a kind of daze. He moved through the house with a heavy silence, making coffee he barely drank, folding laundry that didn't need folding, checking his phone without reading a single message. Ruth didn't ask questions. She simply let him be. Sometimes she sat beside him on the porch in silence, watching the wind stir the trees. Sometimes she stayed in her room, flipping through old photo albums, letting the memories blur together like watercolor. She didn't want to push. Not now. He was here. That was enough. For now. On the third morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, elbows resting on the wood, his head bowed like he was praying or grieving. Ruth poured him a cup of coffee without asking, the way she used to, when he was a teenager coming back from long days at school. He took it, nodded. They didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I think I knew something was wrong. Deep down." Ruth looked up. "But I didn't want to see it," Marcus continued. "I told myself she loved me. That she loved you too. That maybe you were confused." His voice cracked. "I didn't want to believe my wife could be that cruel. And I definitely didn't want to believe I could have let her treat you like that, right under my nose." Ruth reached across the table, placed her hand over his. "You were trying to keep the peace. That's not a sin. That's being a son, a husband, a man in the middle." He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "I just feel like I failed you." Ruth squeezed his hand. "You're still here. That's all I ever wanted." But it wasn't that simple. Some days were still heavy with fog. Not from Laura, but from Ruth's illness. She forgot the stove one morning. Left it burning for nearly an hour before the smell of scorched metal pulled Marcus from the garage. He ran inside, panic in his eyes, and turned everything off. Ruth stood in the doorway, dazed, holding a towel in her hands like it was an apology. "I thought I'd already turned it off." Marcus didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. But later, she heard him on the phone. "Just in case. Not now, no. But maybe in the future. I want to be prepared." She didn't ask who he was talking to. She didn't need to. One afternoon, she found a new journal beside her bed. The cover was soft, deep blue, with her name written in gold on the inside flap. Marcus had written the first page for her. "This is your space, Mama. For anything you want to remember. No one else has to see it. But I will if you want me to." She ran her hand over the ink, feeling its weight. That night, she opened it and wrote, "Today, I remembered the song you used to sing me when I had nightmares. The one about the little boat and the stars. I couldn't remember all the words, but I remembered your voice. It's still here, somewhere inside." The days became small rituals. Coffee on the porch. Short walks down the block. Cooking together, Marcus watching closely now, not hovering but ready. Just in case. They laughed sometimes. Real, full laughter. The kind that caught both of them off guard, like it had been waiting at the door all this time, just needing permission to come in. One day, Ruth asked, "Do you think you'll ever talk to her again?" Marcus hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. If she's willing to face what she did." Ruth looked out the window. "She won't." "Then no," he said. "I won't." Weeks passed. One morning, Tanisha returned for a follow-up visit. This time, Ruth opened the door herself, smiling. "You're looking stronger," Tanisha said as they sat down in the living room. "I feel it," Ruth replied. They talked for a while. About routines. About memory. About the journal. Then Tanisha asked, "Have you thought about what comes next?" Ruth nodded. "I don't want to leave. Not yet." Tanisha smiled. "You don't have to. You're doing better than most. Just keep being honest, With yourself and with Marcus. After she left, Ruth sat on the couch, the silence feeling less like absence and more like peace. She didn't know how long that peace would last. But she knew now. She still had a say. That evening, Marcus brought in a small cardboard box from the garage. "I found some of your old letters," he said, setting it down in front of her. "From Dad. From your mama. Even some from me, when I was at college." Ruth opened the box slowly, her fingers brushing over yellowed envelopes and faded ink. One letter caught her eye, a note from her mother, written decades ago. "You are stronger than any storm. Even when people forget you, even when your own body tries to betray you, you remember who you are. You are love, Ruth. You are light." She read it aloud. Marcus didn't say anything. But he didn't need to. The letter said enough. The first time Ruth returned to church, her legs trembled before she even reached the steps. It had been months. Marcus parked the car and walked beside her, offering an arm without saying a word. She took it, steadying herself more from emotion than weakness. St. Luke's was a modest, whitewashed building with stained glass windows that caught the morning sun just so. It had been her place of comfort, of memory, of identity. Here, she taught Sunday school for years, organized meals for grieving families, held the hands of widows who'd buried their husbands too soon. Here she was known. And here she had disappeared. As they stepped inside, the familiar scent of old hymnals and polish wood wrapped around her like a worn shawl. A few heads turned. Then more. And then soft gasps. "Miss Ruth? Oh, my Lord, I didn't know you were back. Child, we prayed for you every week." Ruth offered a small smile. She wasn't ready for embraces, not yet. But she nodded at each voice, let their kindness wash over her like rain over dry earth. The pastor, Reverend Wallace, spotted her from the pulpit before service began. He came down with arms wide, his dark robes trailing behind him. "Now look what the Lord has done," he said, tears bright in his eyes. "Don't you go embarrassing me," she murmured with a smile. He laughed. "Ruth, you've been embarrassing us all with how much we missed you." He led her to the second row, the one she always sat in before everything fell apart. She sat down slowly, carefully, her hands folded in her lap like they used to be. Marcus sat beside her. And for the first time in a long time, Ruth closed her eyes and let the music fill her. After service, they stayed for coffee and conversation in the fellowship hall. She wasn't used to so many voices anymore, but something about it felt right, like slipping back into old shoes. Sister Geraldine hugged her tighter than anyone else, her big frame nearly lifting Ruth off the ground. "We heard rumors you were gone for good," she said. "But I said, that woman's too stubborn. She'll outlive us all." Ruth chuckled. "Only just. Marcus treating you right now?" Geraldine asked, peering at him with mock suspicion. Marcus grinned sheepishly. "Trying my best, ma'am. You better. Lord help you if I hear different." The warmth, the laughter, the way everyone remembered her favorite tea, it broke something open inside Ruth that she hadn't realized was still closed. She didn't stay long. Her energy faded quickly. But as they drove home, she looked out the window and whispered, "Thank you for bringing me." Marcus didn't say anything, but his hand reached across the console and found hers. At home, they settled into a rhythm. Ruth began doing small things on her own again, folding laundry, feeding the cat, tending the potted plant near the kitchen window. Marcus installed new smoke detectors and wrote out emergency steps on a laminated card near the stove. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he loved her. And she understood that now. They played dominoes some evenings, the way they used to when he was a boy and it was just the two of them, waiting for the world to leave them alone. He let her win. She didn't call him out on it. But not every day was easy. Some mornings she woke up certain it was still 1996. Other times, she called Marcus, Earl, her late brother's name. It didn't happen often, but when it did, the fear crept in like a shadow across the floor, quiet, cold, impossible to shake. Once, she forgot Marcus's birthday. She realized it only the next afternoon and cried for 2 hours straight. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, clutching his hand like it might disappear. "It's okay," he said softly. "You remembered other things." She shook her head. "But not the one thing that mattered." "It all matters, Mama," he said. "And none of it means I love you any less." One night, after he went to bed, she sat by the window and wrote in her journal. "Some days I feel like I'm winning. Others, like I'm just floating through someone else's house. But when Marcus laughs, when he puts his big clumsy hand on mine, I know I'm still me. At least for now. And maybe that's enough." In early spring, Ruth received a letter in the mail. The envelope was clean, elegant, no return address. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single folded page. "Ruth, I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know I'm sorry. I said and did things I can't take back. I told myself lies, that you hated me, that you didn't matter, that your love for Marcus was control, not care. But I was wrong. About everything. Especially you. He's lucky to have you. I wasn't brave enough to see it. Laura." Ruth stared at the page for a long time. Then she folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into her journal between 2 blank pages. She didn't tell Marcus. Not yet. Maybe not ever. On the first truly warm day of the year, Ruth walked out to the garden by herself. The hydrangeas were blooming again, blue and full and defiant. She bent down to touch one, her fingers trembling slightly. She remembered planting it with Marcus when he was 10, both of them covered in mud, laughing as the hose sprayed everywhere. She smiled. Then she whispered, "Still here." Not just the flower. Her. Still here. The community center on Baxter Street hadn't changed much since Ruth's younger days. The same cracked pavement, the same dusty bulletin board, the same smell of strong coffee and floor wax. She stepped inside slowly, leaning on her cane. The front room buzzed with laughter and chatter, the way it always did before the Wednesday afternoon knitting circle. "Lord, is that Ruth Campbell?" Miss Dottie nearly dropped her needles. "I thought you'd done moved out the state." "I did," Ruth said dryly. "All the way across town." The room burst into greetings. Warm hands clutched hers, chairs were shuffled to make room, and someone pushed a cup of weak peach tea into her hand before she could protest. She hadn't planned to stay long. But when the needles started clicking, and the stories flowed like gospel, she settled in and let the rhythm of the room carry her. That day marked something new for Ruth. A step outward. Not back, no, there was no going back to how things had been. But forward, into something else. Something rooted in memory but growing again, like a branch bent by wind but not broken. She began attending the center weekly. Some days she only watched, her hands too stiff to thread the yarn. Other days she managed a few rows. The imperfections didn't matter. She was there, and that meant something. She joined a book group, cooked for the Friday night soup kitchen, gave an impromptu lesson on sweet potato pie that had half the women calling her chef for weeks. Marcus watched all this with quiet pride. He never pressured her. Just offered the car keys, or a ride, or silence when she needed it. One Sunday afternoon, Ruth found herself standing in front of her old house. The one where everything had happened. It looked smaller now. The yard was overgrown. The porch sagged. The paint had started to peel around the edges. There was no sign of Laura. No sign of life, really. She stood at the gate for a long while. Not to go inside. She had no interest in that. But to say goodbye. Not just to the house. To the weight of everything it had come to mean, betrayal, dismissal, the slow erasure of a life she'd built with love and patience. She whispered something then. No one heard it but the wind. And then she turned and walked away. That night, Ruth sat with Marcus in the backyard of their small bungalow. The stars were out, faint but clear. A citronella candle flickered between them, and an old record player hummed slow blues from inside the house. "You remember when you were 10, Ruth said, and you tried to run away with just a peanut butter sandwich and a towel?" Marcus grinned. "Because you wouldn't let me go to the arcade alone. You left a note that said, 'I am leaving this place forever. Tell the cat I said goodbye.'" He laughed, deep and soft. "I was serious. I know you were." She sipped her tea. "I watched you from the window. You sat at the bus stop for 2 hours before coming back. I thought maybe the cat would be waiting," he said. She was. Right on the porch. They were quiet for a moment. Then Ruth said, "You were a good boy, Marcus. Still are. And I'm sorry I made you doubt yourself." He looked at her. "You didn't." "I did," she said gently. "I saw the signs with Laura. I just didn't say enough. I didn't stop it early. And later, when I did try to speak, I wasn't strong enough. Mama, it's not guilt. It's truth. But it's not the end of the truth." She looked at him fully. "You believed her because you loved her. That's not a sin, baby. That's just being human." He swallowed. "You tried to tell me. I did. But you weren't ready to hear it. And that's not a sin either." He wiped a hand over his face. "I should have known better." "No. You know better now. That's the difference." A week later, Ruth spoke at the senior storytelling circle at the community center. She hadn't planned to. But when Miss Eula called out her name, the room clapped before Ruth could even stand. So she did. And she told the story of her mother's last dress, the one sewn from old church linens and trimmed with blue ribbon, worn for every important moment in her final years. She talked about the strength it took to say goodbye to someone still alive. About how silence can be louder than yelling. About the strange dignity of beginning again when you didn't think you had any more, again, left in you. By the end, the room was quiet, not with judgment, but reverence. Someone sniffled. Someone else stood and clapped. Ruth sat down, her heart lighter than it had been in years. That night, Marcus found her in the living room reading an old photo album. He sat beside her, and they looked through it together, black and white photos of Ruth as a child, grainy Polaroids of Marcus in overalls, pictures of birthday cakes and Sunday hats and church parking lots. Ruth tapped a photo of her late husband, Leonard. His eyes were kind. His smile quiet. "He would have liked who you grew up to be," she said. Marcus nodded. "I hope so." They turned a page. There, in the back, tucked behind a church program, was a photo Marcus hadn't seen before. It was Ruth, maybe 25, standing in front of a tiny house in Georgia, holding a garden hoe and wearing a defiant grin. "Who took this?" "Neighbor boy. Said I looked like I was ready to take on the world." Marcus smiled. "You did." She looked at the photo for a long moment. "Maybe I still do," she said. And the room was quiet, but not empty. Autumn came slowly to their part of the South. The air cooled by degrees, reluctant but sure. The leaves turned rust and gold, then dropped in lazy spirals onto sidewalks and porch roofs. Morning smelled like damp wood and something older, something almost like memory. Ruth liked that. There was comfort in slow change. It suited her now. Not the fast turning of events she'd endured the last year, The betrayal, the grief, the shame of being unseen in her own family, but the gentle, almost polite kind of change that came when one had earned the right to move at their own pace. She'd found her rhythm again. Maybe not the same as before, but real all the same. On Mondays, she helped with preschool reading at the church. On Wednesdays, she knit with women who knew exactly how to laugh at loss without mocking it. Fridays, she taught a cooking class to a gaggle of young mothers who had more heart than recipes. And Sundays, she always saved Sundays for Marcus. They didn't always talk about serious things. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. They walked through the park, fed ducks, played cards. But he came. Every week. Without fail. She didn't need to ask why anymore. One quiet Thursday afternoon, Ruth sat on the porch peeling apples for a pie. A breeze lifted the hem of her apron. The knife in her hand moved slowly, steady in its motion. Her thoughts wandered, as they often did, to her mother's kitchen. To the years before grief carved itself so deep into her life. She was midway through the last apple when she heard footsteps on the porch. Not Marcus. His truck wasn't in the drive. Not the neighbor kids. It was a workday, and the school bus hadn't yet passed. She looked up. Laura stood at the edge of the steps, clean and composed. A thin trench coat clutched at the waist. Eyes like glass, sharp, unreadable. Ruth didn't move. Laura's lips twisted into something almost like a smile. "Didn't expect you'd still be here," she said. Ruth set the knife down. "I live here," she said calmly. Laura's gaze swept the porch, the rocking chair, the plants. "This your little retirement fantasy now? Knitting circles and casseroles?" Ruth didn't answer. She folded the apple peels into the bowl and stood, slow but straight. Laura let out a small, breathy laugh. "I bet you told everyone, didn't you? Told them how the big, bad white girl threw you out." Ruth looked her in the eye. "No," she said. "I told them how I got back up." That stopped her. For a beat, Laura's mask slipped. Just a beat. Then it returned. "I'm not here to fight," she said, voice clipped. "I came because Marcus wants closure. He asked if I'd try to speak to you." Ruth tilted her head. "Closure or control?" Laura bristled. "You know, I always wondered what he saw in you. Always trying to play saint and martyr at once. You think being quiet makes you wise, but it just makes you weak." Ruth smiled faintly. "I was quiet," she said, "but not because I was weak. I was quiet because I knew you wouldn't last. And I refused to waste my breath on something that already knew how to rot from the inside." Laura's face twisted. "I loved him," she snapped. "No," Ruth said gently. "You wanted what he could do for you. But love," she stepped forward, "love doesn't make a man question the worth of his mother. Love doesn't isolate, or mock, or lie. Love doesn't destroy good things just to feel powerful." Laura looked away. "I didn't think he'd believe me," Ruth continued. "And for a while, he didn't. But the truth doesn't care who believes in it. It just waits." A long silence settled between them. Laura spoke finally. "He's still got a soft spot for you." "Good," Ruth said. "Don't take that for more than it is," Laura added coldly. "He's not the boy you raised anymore." Ruth's voice stayed warm. "No, he's the man he chose to be. And I'm proud of him." That seemed to rattle Laura more than anything else. Without another word, she turned on her heel and left. Ruth watched her go. Not out of fear. Not even bitterness. Just a quiet sort of sorrow. The kind you feel when watching someone run from a fire they lit themselves. That evening, Ruth told Marcus what happened. He listened without interrupting, eyes cast downward, hands folded. When she finished, he nodded once. Then said simply, I'm sorry. For what? For all the time you had to live in that silence. Ruth placed her hand over his. It's done now. The silence is over. Weeks passed. Then winter came, short and sharp, the southern kind that plays at snow but never fully commits. The days shortened. Porch visits turned into kitchen chats. The pie tin never stayed full for long. On Christmas Eve, Ruth and Marcus sat by the fireplace. He handed her a box, wrapped carefully. She opened it, slow fingers, soft grin, and found a frame inside. A photo. It was a picture of the two of them, taken at the community center's fall festival. Ruth wore her Sunday hat. Marcus held a cup of cider. They weren't looking at the camera, just at each other, laughing. Underneath, in Marcus's careful handwriting, were the words, I see you now. Ruth pressed the frame to her chest. She didn't cry. Not then. But later that night, when the house was still, she sat in bed and looked at the photo again. I see me too, she whispered. And finally, she meant it. In spring, the community center hosted a mural project. Everyone was invited to paint something on the old brick wall out back. Something that meant resilience. Ruth arrived with a small tin of blue paint and a single brush. She stood quietly for a moment, then reached up and painted a single ribbon, a deep blue arc, like the trim on her mother's dress. Then she wrote beneath it, Not gone. Not broken. Just beginning again.